World of Warcraft has been around for over 11 years now. It is quite an achievement for a game to be around that long and still be relevant. Of course, it's not the same game it was 2005, and because of this, WoW just has so much history. Today we will talk about a weapon that will soon be in the hands of players, but for over a decade it has been around in one way or another. The Ashbringer is truly a special weapon, and through time it has been an urban legend, an important part of the game's story, an in-game exploit, a hot item on the WoW account scam market, and soon it will become one of the artifact weapons. This is the history of the Ashbringer. Enjoy! There was a time in the game where epics were actually epics, and it wasn't a common sight to see a player walking around with all purple items. It was during this time, in early vanilla, that the Ashbringer was first data mined. And when players found out that this item was in the game files, of course there would have to be a way of retrieving it. The Ashbringer had to be obtainable, otherwise it wouldn't be in the game files, right? Needless to say, people began speculating and searching for it, and yeah, there were a lot of clues pointing to the blade's existence. The first time the Ashbringer was actually mentioned in-game was by Caretaker Alan. This NPC could be found outside Light's Hope Chapel in Eastern Plaguelands, and he said a lot of crazy things. He still does. If you visit him on live servers, you can hear him say stuff like, "I can't take these taxes, fika me, fika you." Or, "I come from the land down under, where women plague and men sunder." But he also says this. The what bringer? Oh, the Ashbringer. Never heard of it. What? Stop bothering me. And just the very mention of the blade, even though this was all the players had to go on, they were sure that the Ashbringer could be found. Now, I wouldn't personally call this much of a proof myself, but in patch 1.3.0, more hints of the weapon appeared. This was when Dire Maul was introduced, and with it, the neutral faction Shendralar. They could be found in the Athenaeum within the dungeon itself, and among them were Zealots, who revealed some interesting information. The first quote they gave away was, "Has the prince recanted the tale of the Ashbringer? It is our most favorite of his stories. His favorite is the follow-up to the Ashbringer." Of course, nobody has ever been able to get that story out of him. If this wasn't enough to confirm to the players who were searching for Ashbringer that they could actually get the blade, their second quote leaves no doubt. "The Master holds great interest in the lair of Nefarian. If only someone would defeat the dragon and his minions and retell the tale to the prince, I bet that would loosen the prince's lips. The Ashbringer could be found." Now, it can't be any clearer than that. The quote gives away the following. Prince Trothelrin knew how to find the Ashbringer, and if someone were to defeat Nefarian, he would talk. This does seem simple enough, but at the time, Blackwing Lair hadn't even been implemented yet, so the only thing that players could do was to wait for Blackwing Lair to be released, kill Nefarian, and then come back with his head to hopefully get the prince to talk to them. But as you might suspect, when they finally got the head of Nefarian and returned with it, nothing. Despite the quote that seemed to straight out confirm that through Dire Maul and the death of Nefarian, the Ashbringer could be found, the players found themselves in another dead end. Luckily though, another breakthrough had been made in the search for the Ashbringer just before the release of Blackwing Lair. With patch 1.5 came the Battlegrounds, and among them Alterac Valley. In here, you needed to loot other players' corpses to get items used to summon ancient defenders to your side. By doing so, you could also find other items, and one of them was Nat Pagel's Guide to Extreme Angling. This was a readable item with the following description. This book is missing every page but the last. And this very final page reads, "And so, that's where you will find the legendary sword of the Scarlet High Lord, Ashbringer. Ain't it amazing what you will run into in an ordinary day of fishing?" It is also worth mentioning that an item called a thoroughly read copy of Nat Pagel's Extreme Angling dropped in Dire Maul. This was not a readable item, but players still began to make connections between Dire Maul and Nat Pagel and the Ashbringer, and Perhaps the answer, or even the blade itself, could be found within a lake. And the speculation that the Ashbringer could be fished up is actually living on to this day. There is an item called the Dustbringer, which can only be found by fishing in Northrend. It is a blue quality dagger with a very similar proc to the original blade. But instead of having belonged to the Scarlet High Lord, this is the blade of the Crimson Landlord. Of course, it didn't matter how many hours players spent by the lake, no one would ever fish up the Ashbringer. But those who searched for the blade just wouldn't give up. Another speculation arose, originating from the NPCs Bard the Sharp-Eye and Alexia Iron Knife. These two had nothing to offer the players, they were not quest givers, they were not vendors, but they did have some interesting things to say. Bard the Sharp-Eye said the following: "Hello, I've set up camp here in the Bulwark to make my preparations for my journey into the Plaguelands. I've heard a rumor that a great human wizard took up residency in Heartglen not terribly long ago. He was commissioned by the Scarlet Crusade to fashion their warriors and hunters with bows and guns. It is said that he completed a remarkable weapon before the Crusade killed him. I guess their mistrust in the arcane has grown." Alexia Ironknife had the following very similar thing to say: "Greetings. Don't have too much time to talk. I'm just using Shillwind as a camp to get some rest before heading to Heartglen. I have heard word that before they went crazy, the Scarlet Crusade had a mage working for them who was trying to create powerful bows and guns for their soldiers. I am not sure if he succeeded or not. The Crusade killed him before any of his finished product made it out. Maybe they killed him to keep it a secret, or maybe they distrust Arcane that much." Now these two quotes doesn't really mention the Ashbringer by name, but it still led to speculations that somewhere in the Western Plaguelands a dead mage would be able to guide the players forward to the blade. A unique bind-on pickup item called Timoleon's Phylactery dropped off the large vile slimes in the Weeping Cave in the Western Plaguelands. Because of the fact that the slimes used attacks like Arcane Bolt, Arcane Explosion and Crimson Fury, players began to speculate that this had something to do with the dead mage and the Scarlet Crusade. Now, of course, it didn't matter how many of these poor slimes people murdered, no one would ever get an Ashbringer this way anyway. Eventually, this post was made by Ionix, a community manager at Blizzard Entertainment at the time. It is true that currently Ashbringer is not in the game, although one day in the future it will be, but not until there is an awesome legendary item for casters. This put an end to the search of the Ashbringer, but only until patch 1.11 dropped. With it came Naxxramas, and the legendary staff Atish, Great Staff of the Guardian. Not only was the legendary caster weapon Ionix had mentioned now available, but a corrupted version of the Ashbringer was actually lootable from Naxxramas. Back then, Baron Rivendare was not one of the four horsemen. Instead, you had to fight Alexandros Morgraine himself. Players who were lucky enough to loot the corrupted Ashbringer would find themselves inflicted with the will of the Ashbringer. This had several notable effects. First of all, the player would hear Alexandros Morgraine whisper to them. As long as you had a blade equipped, you would hear whispers like, You would also get hated by the Argent Dawn, and friendly with the Scarlet Crusade. Realizing Morgraine's whispers mentioned his son Renaud, who was a boss in the Scarlet Monastery, players took the blade there, and they met a unique event unlike anything ever implemented in the game since. On their way to Renaud, the mobs would kneel down around the players, and when they finally reached him, a spirit of Alexandros Morgraine would appear and strike down his son. Not only that, But going into the hidden room of the instance, players would be able to revive Fairbanks, and what he said clearly confirmed that the Ashbringer could be rebuilt. I am afraid that blade which you hold in your hands is beyond saving. The hatred runs too deep. But do not lose hope. Where one chapter ends, a new one begins. Find his son, a more devout and pious man you may never meet. It is rumored that he is able to build Ashbringer anew, without requiring the old, tainted blade. The Outland, find him there. This made a lot of sense. The item used to craft the Ashbringer originated from Draenor, and the Burning Crusade was just around the corner. If what Fairbanks said was true, then the players would finally get their hands on the Ashbringer in the next expansion. However, when TBC rolled around, Morgraine's second son was nowhere to be found. In fact, the only hint towards the Ashbringer could be found in Old Hillspread. If you go to South Shore in the Escape from Durnhall dungeon, you will see a very interesting piece of lore surrounding the Ashbringer's origins. But the expansion went by, the corrupted Ashbringer stayed corrupted, and in Wrath of the Lich King we find Darion Morgraine, the second son of Alexandros. He is now carrying the corrupted Ashbringer himself, and he is one of the Lich King's Death Knights. I think you all know this story. Tyrion Fordring cleanses the blade, and it seems like it will never truly be in the hands of players. In a BlizzCon 2009 panel, it is confirmed that we will never be able to cleanse the corrupted Ashbringer.
Alright, a really quick thing that you're going to blow off probably. I've had a corrupted Ashbringer for a long time, and you kind of tease me, and it's cool that everything bows down, but are you going to ever let us purify it, or is it just kind of stuck there? No. That's okay. That was the one I knew you were going to blow off. Alright.
With the Wrath of the Lich King revamp of an Naxxramas, Morgraine is also removed, and so is the corrupted Ashbringer. But of course, the history of this weapon is not over yet. Cataclysm introduced a new feature into the World of Warcraft, the transmog system. And with new features, of course there is bugs and glitches. Death Knights and the corrupted Ashbringer were never available at the same time, so how can it be that all of a sudden people started seeing Death Knights walking around with the sword? The answer to that is a transmog glitch, which allows an owner to the blade to put the appearance on an item and trade with another player. I won't go into detail exactly how it worked, and I actually don't know if it's still possible, but there's still plenty of people online trying to sell these transmogs. And when I looked around when making this video, I saw prices ranging from $40 up to $1,000. And beside the transmog business, there are just so many people trying to sell accounts with characters holding the corrupted Ashbringer, and the requested price for these can be a few hundred to a few $1,000s. So I think it's safe to say that even today the hunt for the Ashbringer never really ended. But of course, to quote Garrosh Hellscream,
times change.
So in the next expansion, the Ashbringer will become the artifact weapon for the Retribution Paladins. If you don't want to know how that happens, mute the video until the spoiler warning text disappears. So at the start of the expansion, Tyrion Fordring will actually die, and we will take up the role as a new Ashbringer. This means carrying the blade that so many players have been wanting to have since the start of the game really. The hunt for the Ashbringer that started when caretaker Alan first mentioned it in Vanilla will come to an end this year. And in a way, this also marks the end of the Ashbringer's role as an important lore weapon. Blizzard has already said that the artifacts will not follow us into the next expansions. So in about 2 years or so, we will probably hang up the Ashbringer and move on to better things. They also can't really take the weapon away from players after this expansion, so we might actually be the last chapter of the Ashbringer story. And whether or not that is a good or bad way to end the legacy of this weapon, I think there are as many opinions as there are players. I know people who have been leveling paladins just to get their hands on this blade, and others I've talked to thinks that not only Ashbringer but the entire idea of artifact weapons is just stupid. But that is a discussion for another video. For now, I'm going to end the history of the Ashbringer from Vanilla to Legion, and I really hope you enjoyed it. And if you did, please let me know by liking the video, and I might do more of this in the future. But until then, take care.